All right, welcome to another town hall, Americans for Citizens Voting, a group that was started in response to many jurisdictions, localities, non-citizens were being allowed to vote in municipal elections. Anyone knows that that's just a slippery slope to having illegal people voting in this country. But it's not so much a focus on illegal citizens, it's more of a focus of people that have green cards and that are here legally are gaining driver's licenses and in many cases being placed on voting rolls. And also in many cases, people have been voting. We have two guests with us today. First, I want to welcome Catherine Engelbrecht. Am I saying it correctly?
Yes.
Catherine Engelbrecht to the show. I'm very excited to talk to her. And I also want to thank her for her battle of trying to keep our elections fair with everything that's going on. And our second guest is also Paul Jacob with the Citizens Initiative Fund. He's a noted libertarian. He's very vocal about this issue of non-citizens voting in our elections. And so he's going to be asking Catherine some questions as well. We also want to get some input from the folks that are watching this. This is a very serious issue. The left is already kind of portraying that they think this election is going to be stolen, but it's going to be by Donald Trump. So they're already setting up the window to be able to claim that Donald Trump stole the election and did it by fraud. So let's get started. First of all, I want to talk to Catherine a little bit about her life before she became an activist. How did she get involved with this? And then talk a little bit also about your IRS struggle.
Sure. Well, yeah, prior to True the Vote, I had no political background. I'd grown up in a home where my dad had been on city council for many, many years, and so civic duty was sort of part of what we did. But I mean, I volunteered at church and at my kids' school, and I had a small business. And it was really during the sort of uprising of the Tea Party that in my world anyway, that sort of came at the same time that different aspects of my day-to-day life, I just saw government continuing to encroach. As a small business owner in the oil and gas field, government was coming down with more and more restrictions, and in healthcare and in education. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do something about that. And so there had been a need for people to work at the polls, and I thought, well, I'll go check that out, and saw problems. Came back, talked to a small group, and said, let's take a closer look at this. And that sort of set me on a path that now is a national movement for voters' rights and election integrity. I would have never thought that any of this would have happened. And in fact, it's interesting. I'd been in business for 16 years, had, an adult, had never had any issue with the government. But 2 months after I filed our paperwork for 501c3 status, it was just like, a dog whistle had sounded, and there was a new group that was going to try to take on election integrity, and they saw that we were gaining momentum. And so the other part of my story is as you alluded, the IRS. We began getting visits from the FBI, and then from OSHA, and then from Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and it was all very sort of out of nowhere and inexplicable. Meanwhile, I was answering question upon question with the IRS, trying to secure the C3 and tell them everything I possibly could. That played out, if you've ever been a part of a nonprofit, you might know it usually takes 4 to 6 months max to get your C3. We were rolling over into 3 years, and it had just been this cat and mouse, answering these questions. And so finally, I just said, enough is enough. I hadn't spoken of all of the other government agencies that had gone on for 2 years. And in that period of time, I had gone through 23 different audits or investigations or inquiries. It was crazy. But the bigger, and at that point, I just said, that's it. We should sue the IRS. And so that case was opened in 2013, and it took till 2019 for us to win. And the judge found that not only were our constitutional rights violated, but that the Department of Justice and the IRS was guilty of obstruction of justice, which actually impacted his overall judgment for attorney's fees, which was important. So it's been a wild, wild ride, but at the very heart of it, it's because we dared to take on the issue of election integrity. We dared to, I mean, what could we be so close to that they would stop at nothing to silence us? And I think, now I can tell you that I think True the Vote was started for this moment in time and for this election.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. Was the original organization you were starting that got hung up, was it True the Vote?
Yes, I actually had two organizations. I had one called King Street Patriots that was a C4, and then True the Vote, which was a C3. They both kind of got hung up, but it was far and away, it was True the Vote that they narrowed in on, and went full-throated after trying to make us go away.
Please give the web address for True the Vote. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can check out truethevote.org, truethevote.org. And please check it out. Volunteer, sign up. We need to stay connected in this time.
And we're going to go into the initiatives that you've been doing lately, but I want to get Paul Jacob from Citizens Initiative Fund to ask you a question.
Sure. Hey,
Will,
Paul.
and I wanted to, hey, how are you doing? It's great to see you again.
Thanks so much.
I think what you went through and other people did as well with the IRS is so important to not get lost. And the reason it might get lost is because most of the media specifically, purposely ignored it as a story, claimed there was no scandal, even though, as you point out, in the end, the court comes down and says, not only did they violate your rights, and let's talk about what rights those were. Those are the essential rights to organize and get together with other people to be politically active. So those aren't your rights, to not be searched or something else. These are the fundamental political rights that if you don't have Egypt, where if you're a blogger, you might find yourself in prison, or Russia or China, or so it's been sloughed over so much. I just wanted to kind of stop and say, these are very essential rights. And then, of course, as you added, Catherine, they end up getting found guilty of obstruction of justice too. So not only did they violate your rights, they then tried to further violate rights so they didn't have to come clean. And because the media has ignored it so much, many people in this country don't really understand what happened there and how serious it was. And it strikes me that it's somewhat the same sort of thing as when you read, and Chris has been, post stuff up on Americans for Citizen Voting Facebook page, about some of these different cases where they're finding all kinds of citizens voting, oftentimes being registered to vote, maybe not even voting, registered almost against their will. They're not even aware of it.
Oh, yeah.
That's not a story. That's not a story. It's not very many people. It's only these many people. And then you end up having, different groups have sued to find out what is the actual number. And it turns out oftentimes to be a pretty sizable number. And of course, my view, and I'll get to a question, is that any fraud is fraud. I've worked a lot in the initiative petition process, and people have alleged fraud, and we did some studies that showed how tiny the fraud was compared to all the people working who weren't committing any fraud whatsoever. But we never ignored that fraud or acted like it was no big deal. And so, I guess my question to you is fighting uphill in terms of getting, with the exception of Fox News, on TV, maybe One American Network, but most of the networks, most of the newspapers, which are taking their stories from the Washington Post and the New York Times and the AP, are on the left, and they are ignoring these stories. And so I guess my question to you is, what do you see as the best way for us to get out this message about the problems that doesn't seem to be clear lines about citizens get to vote, non-citizens are not voters?
Well, it's a great question, and I think broadly, one of the big things that citizens don't realize is that there are ways to serve in the polls, to see it for yourself, to be up close and personal and proximate to a process. And I think that is a big, big part of why we find ourselves today where we are, because we've just sort of, we've abdicated. We've just kind of let, oh, government will handle it. And now we know, no, they're not. When the Obama administration came in, they used as you well know, they used the motor voter provision to broaden to all social services, so that voter registration applications were attached to every form of social service. And then the Obama administration made those services available to non-citizens. And they did something very, very clever. Instead of on the checkbox, instead of opting in, you have to know to opt out. If you don't opt out, you are automatically going to be registered. And then that information is piped from the federal forms straight into the state. And we know as a practical matter that the federal government is not checking citizenship status. So it's a problem that and then the states try to, as we all know, I mean, they're trying to clean their rolls, they have to fight, they get sued, it's not an easy process. In the age in which we live, you have to ask yourself, who is this serving to have our rolls so corrupted? Because there's no reason for it. There's no reason to have not to have identity, residency, and citizenship. Even at the point of voting, there's no reason that data exists. So why? The only conclusion that can be drawn is that it serves a purpose. That the vagary and the inaccuracies in those roles serve a purpose. I submit that it's because it allows for a margin that can be played, because you don't need a whole lot of fraud. You just need a little bit of fraud in the right places. Right. And with non-citizens, it's very difficult, but you can get a little closer right. Just doing research as a citizen yourself. But none of it's easy.
Nevada is looked at as going to be one of those pivotal swing states in this election. I know that your organization had some specific actions that they were taking in Nevada. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, we had just completed litigation in New Mexico, where there was an effort to try and sort of, in a very sort of stealth way, make that whole state mail-in. And so we had some volunteers in Nevada who'd seen what we did in New Mexico call and say, "Can you help?" So we found ourselves there in Nevada, which to my shock, the Republican Secretary of State authorized universal mail-ins going to active and inactive voters. It's inexplicable why you would take such drastic action. But the thing that, and now, I mean, flash forward. So we ended up suing the state of Nevada. That's still in play. Mm-hmm. But we started that now in late March, early April. It's still kind of playing out. At that point, it was just, it seemed like there might be an increased number of leftist lawsuits hitting the state. To date, there are over 70 lawsuits that are out there. And what you don't hear about is they're suing or just going along with what is happening by executive fiat in the case of the Nevada case. But what you don't hear about is that it's a lot more than just universal mail-ins that we're having problems with here. They're looking to push unlimited voter harvesting, which means that somebody can come and pick up as many ballots as they want and expose the most vulnerable populations to all kinds of intimidation. So you've got voter harvesting, they want to get rid of security provisions like signature comparisons. They want to get away or strike down voter ID. And you're not hearing the media talk about that. You're hearing the media talk about, the convenience of mail-ins. So in Nevada, we are trying to fight to restore some balance to the process. And part of our argument was that the Secretary of State did not have the authorization to do what she did. I mean, she, for all intents and purposes, proclaimed police powers to go in and do what she did. So, you know, but now, I mean, it's happening. It's not even shocking because it's happening in so many places.
And, you know, Paul was talking about how the media manipulates the message. I tell you one thing that really kind of gets under my skin when they try to call people like Donald Trump or other people that mail in their ballots hypocrites. Why is that okay for them to mail in their ballots, but they don't want other citizens to do that? And that's not the truth. I mean, what we're talking about is I don't mind personally if someone is getting and they're requesting a ballot and it's being mailed to them. I have no problem with that. The problem with I have is what some of them on the left have proposed is that ballots are mailed out to people that are on voting rolls, not checking to see if the people are alive, dead, have moved. I wish we could get that message, you know, out that we're not against mail-in ballots. Is sending one out to just everyone.
And that is exactly our position. There are reasons for mail-ins, and many voters really rely on that as a way to, you know, if they live out of, or they're going to be out of the location, or if they're elderly. I mean, there are reasons, but those reasons are governed by state laws, and those state laws need to be observed. And beyond that, you're exactly right about, you know, what's really problematic about mail-ins. The same groups that are suing to advance universal mail-in ballots are the groups that prior to COVID were suing to prevent the states from cleaning their voter rolls. So it's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. Yeah. And I worked at the election board in the early 2000s, and I knew we did regular maintenance to try to clean up those rolls. Paul, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, this is such an important point because everything we hear in the media is mail-in ballots are fine, work well, make it easy to vote. The only reason to be against them is because you're an evil, terrible Republican. Right. And you don't want people to vote. And the reality is, I agree with both of you. I have no problem with mail-in ballots. The problem is when you are mailing out ballots to people who did not request it.
Yes.
To people who are maybe active on the rolls but don't intend to vote, or even, as you pointed out, Chris, sometimes they're mailing them out to inactive voters. Those ballots sit around. If you then allow people to go harvest them, they can harvest them because some voter signed and voted. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Thank you for taking my ballot in. Or they can find a bunch of them lying where people have thrown the mail away, and they can then vote themselves illegally and bring plenty of votes to the polls. That's what we're concerned about. And it to me, it's a little bit like there's this new thing called automatic voter registration that the left has pushed. And friends of mine who are big in let's make democracy better tend to favor this if they're on the left. I don't. The idea is you just register everybody to vote. You just register driver's license or whatever. You don't even tell them. You just add them to the rolls. Now, I want it to be easy, but the problem there is that you're adding people who don't even know it. And of course, we've seen so many cases of non-citizens who now get a driver's license or some other interaction with the government and are put on the voting rolls. Well, the problem is, one, they might vote. That's not right. But the other problem is they may get in trouble for being on the voting rolls because they're not supposed to, and it's not even their fault. And so we have a fairly concerted effort to make this all, very loose to where there's all kinds of fraud that could happen. We have seen some fraud. It doesn't determine every election. It's not, fraud isn't hiding under your bed, but let's nip any of it we can in the bud. And that's not the message we're getting from the media. They're not looking at these changes and saying, okay, what's the plus? What's the downside?
That's right.
They're saying anything that makes it easier to stuff the ballot box is good, and anything anybody who doesn't like it is a bad person who's trying to somehow, stop the vote.
That's exactly right.
Dr.
It's
Catherine
funny because
Engelbrecht.
it's also,
Go ahead, Paul.
well, I was just going to say one more thing that's along these lines. We like early voting, so it's not all on one day, and you can vote a couple weeks earlier, and some places 30 days early, and everybody likes it. Let's make it easy. Let's vote for 2 or 3 months. There's the reason that we have to be, I do think it makes sense to have some early voting, but when you create it to where you have 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of early voting, you are now giving people with money who can communicate with voters during that entire 5-week period a tremendous leg up over the candidate who doesn't have as much money.
That's right.
And so it's a big help to incumbents. The other thing is that challengers tend to catch up with incumbents in the closing weeks of the campaign, especially if they can put all their money into those last few weeks to make it go further, since challengers don't tend to have the same amount of money that the average incumbent does. So there are things like this that you could say, oh, Paul doesn't like early voting. Well, I do like early voting. I just don't want it used in such a way that it's going to make elections less competitive. In the same way that we like mail-in ballots, we like all kinds of things. We just want rules so that people don't cheat and turn the whole goodness of these reforms into a system that we can't trust.
That's right.
Oh,
That's exactly right.
We're speaking with Katherine Engelbrecht with True the Vote. Catherine, give that website again, please.
TrueTheVote.org.
Excellent.
TrueTheVote.org.
Excellent.
Thanks.
So we talked about some of the things in Nevada and in New Mexico. And tell us about some of the other states you have lawsuits going on. And if you had to give a 1-minute elevator speech, what would you tell them about TrueTheVote.com?
Well, right now, our litigation, we're sort of keeping our powder dry because things are shifting and changing so much that we are in Nevada. We're going to see where else we were in Virginia for the primary. We're going to see where else things pop up that we can jump in and have a meaningful impact with. Our focus now is on recruiting, training, and mobilizing citizens to be ready to work in the polls. So working as a poll worker, as a poll watcher, working on mail-in ballot review boards, working at central count. This November, and as Paul, as you point out, in early election, there should be no polling place unmanned. There should be no vacancy. We have got to have eyes on and be as attentive as we can possibly be to this process. If we are sitting around waiting for the returns to come in and getting that spoon fed to us and we haven't engaged, shame on us, because it is going to be a fight to the finish. And frankly, it won't be decided, election night. I mean, this is something that's going to go on and on. All to say, we are focused on citizens engaging in the process in greater numbers than ever before. And we believe that that's going to change things.
And are you seeing that on your website? And give folks the website again and how they can get involved with True the Vote.
Yes. So yes, come to the website, truethevote.org. You can sign up to just volunteer. There are projects going on right now. We're about to launch a new project called Call Your County, where we're going to, we've provided a bunch of information to make this easy, but we want people to call their local elections office and ask a series of questions to help refine what it is, where are the holes, what is the need? Because the need now is different than the need was 5 or 6 months ago. Things are very, very different and changing very quickly. So trying to educate citizens, and then we have training that supplements that, some mobilization. Ultimately, we as an organization can't place election workers, but what we can do is get them educated and ready to be handed off, if you will, to the party or candidate of their choice or to work for the county. But I think the greatest service is just a broad wake-up call that we are all in this together. This is not a spectator sport. Citizens were always meant to run elections, and we've forgotten that somewhere along the way, and we need to re-engage.
I'm in Missouri and Paul is in Virginia. Do you have any operations here or any plans for future litigation here?
In Virginia, there are some great groups that Paul, you probably know them, but that we can get you in touch with. we don't, and then Missouri, no, but you know, if you want to nominate yourself as
Okay.
as the new leader, I mean, all it is, you know, is really just trying to figure out who else in your state or in your county or in your municipality has a similar desire to work in the elections, and we'll help, you know, connect the dots there. It's coming together very, very quickly, and we're very.
Paul, we got about 2 minutes. I want to give you give you a minute, and then I want to finish the last minute with Katherine for some closing thoughts.
Well, I think there's nothing more important said today anywhere, much less here, than what Katherine just said about this not being a spectator sport. If you want to sit back on election day and watch your country become better, more secure, more free, more prosperous, tough. Because unless you're out there doing something,
Right.
unless you're at the polls helping and watching, unless you're joining groups and working with other people to make this election successful, you're going to have a rotten night on the couch.
Yeah.
And so that's really what it's all about. You know, you and I, Chris, work on citizen voting because in recent years we discovered that there seems to be this idea that it's okay to let anybody vote. I mean, this country spent a couple years about Russian collusion in the election because Russia was buying Facebook ads and so on and trying to stir trouble on Facebook as if they were the only ones. But a little joke there.
All right.
But
All
the
right.
reality is some people, it's okay if they send over a squadron of people to vote in our election.
Yeah. All right, let's let Paul, let's let Katherine wrap up. We've got about a minute left. I want her to get some final thoughts, give out the website again, and any social media she has. And want to thank you for your time tonight. Enlighten us on this issue, and truethevote.com. I wish you all the success in the world, and I hope that you will come back for future town hall meetings with us.
Absolutely, anytime. I think that, you know, if you take away one message from tonight, please know that yes, things don't look great. There's a lot of chaos out there, but elections are meant to be run by citizens. And there is no other way, as Paul very appropriately said, there is no way to stop this slide other than to get involved. Government is not going to correct itself. We have to engage. And if we engage, amazing things are possible, but we have to choose. And so I challenge anybody that's listening right now, tell yourself, I am going to go in tomorrow to work, or I'm going to tell whomever I need to tell, I'm going to write it on my calendar that I'm working on election day. And commit to being involved, because it's going to take all of us to turn this ship around. So, and I'm very encouraged that that's actually going to happen, because we're seeing people come up from all across the country who just want to help preserve free and fair elections. And at the end of the day, if our elections aren't truly fair, we are not truly free. So we've got to get ahead of this, and we invite people to come, volunteer. Can get you trained, we can get you placed, we can help you, and you can check that out at truethevote.org. You can follow us at True the Vote on Twitter. We have a Facebook page for True the Vote. Just connect with us anywhere you can. You will find a community of people who are both concerned but also crazy in love with their country and just want us all to have a free and fair process.
And that's Catherine Engelbrecht with truethevote.com. Paul, thank you. I appreciate it. That's Paul Jacob with Citizens Initiative Fund. Everyone have a pleasant night. Thank you for those who tuned in.